first presentation will be from Senator Deeds, who's first on the list. Good morning, sir. Senate Bill 1063.
1063, and I've got 1442 as well. Mr. Chair, much of the discussion of the Commission on Mental Health this past year was driven by what happened down Hampton Roads with the death of Jermichael Mitchell. Senator Cosgrove, Delegate Rob Bell, Delegate Vivian Watts kind of led the way in this part of the discussion. And fortunately, some of the governor's recommendations dovetailed with the recommendations of our commission. 1063, or what remains of it, is a bill that essentially now just redefines who's on the Board of Corrections. The whole idea in the beginning was not only to do what 1442 could do to assess people in the people that were coming into jail, but also to give the Board of Corrections the authority to review, the authority and the tools necessary to review jail deaths. What this bill does now, and I think that the Board of Corrections has that authority right now to review jail deaths in regional jails, and they still have $100,000 in the Senate budget under this bill. What this bill does right now is redefine the membership of the Board of Corrections to make sure that you've got people who have experience in dealing with people that are mentally ill. Simple as that.
Questions of the committee?
Any questions?
I'm confused about the budget. The Senate has the money in it for
$100,000, yes, sir. There was initially, I think there was $200,000. I think Rob Bell carried this bill over here, and the bill didn't have success here, and it had a $200,000 budget amendment. Had a $200,000 budget amendment in the Senate. The Senate trimmed the bill back.
It's $100,000, isn't it?
They trimmed it back. They trimmed the budget back to $100,000, and they trimmed the bill back significantly.
Okay. What is the one position? Why do they need the one?
They need the position because somebody's got to review the deaths.
They can't do that within their capacity.
They just don't have any capacity because they don't have a budget right now. They don't have anybody on staff to do this sort of work. One of the problems that we had, and I think a problem that the public had, was that there was nobody willing to take responsibility for investigating Jermichael Mitchell's death. And the jail conducted an internal survey, which of course nobody had access to. The Inspector General's report was not satisfactory, and the reality is she didn't have the tools and didn't have the authority to make the investigation anyway. The Board of Corrections has the authority. We're just trying to give them the tool to make sure they can review the deaths. And we don't, you know, I don't know right now how many deaths there are per year. I don't know how many would warrant investigation or warrant review, but this would be designed to give them one FTE to conduct those reviews.
further questions?
Yes.
Senator Deeds, in the list of potential members for the board, where is the representation for the victims in these cases? And the board is looking at parole and those types of things.
That's the parole board.
Parole board, but don't they have an oversight? This board has an oversight of that?
I don't think they have an oversight over the parole board, no.
Thank you.
Hey, Senator, I understand the intent. I think it's a good intent, and I'm sure members agree. Here's our dilemma. We pass it, and the money's not sustained in the budget. No FTE, and so
I understand that.
you know the board will have all this great language and no way to implement it. You know, my little draconian way of thinking about things is, if something's really important to you, you'll find a way to do it. I think this is really important, okay? So I wouldn't be surprised if they find a way to do it, but that would be
Mr. Chair, I think you
just my guess.
You could even redefine the board and strip the money from the budget. And that way, the bill itself does not require $100,000 to what the bill does now is it redefines the membership of the board. And it makes sure you've got people on the board who are experienced and can I guess, find the way that you're talking about.
That's my sense. Okay, Chairman, Delegate Pease.
Yes, Senator Diaz, I'm sure you're familiar with some of our concerns over the House versions of these bills, primarily for the monetary considerations. But how would you see this bill if it were acted favorably upon working with the recent actions where we're taking a position on the OIG? Do you feel that if we pass this bill with a restructuring of the board and then with a new OIG coming in, that we are assured that we will be having investigations when they are necessary?
My concern about the OIG statute, Mr. Chair, Delegate Pease, is that it's not, it's very unclear about, and in fact, she was operating, my understanding, she was operating under instruction from the Attorney General that she didn't have the authority to conduct an investigation inside the jail, inside the regional jail. That's why the Department of Corrections has that authority. We're trying to redefine that here. I think the other way to approach it would be to redefine the Inspector General's authority. Now, I agree with Delegate Bell. There were other questions she could have asked. She should have asked. But the way to address, to make sure she could have done, the Inspector General has the authority to do what we wanted her to do there, would be to redefine that statute.
Mr. Chairman, just to follow up, I appreciate your response very much. I think the committee does as well. Specifically, as you stated, regarding the Department of Corrections and their existing authorities, because it has been reported in various publications that maybe they didn't and that we were just mistaken. And I think our position has been pretty clear that these things should be done. If we can improve the process, then I think we do want to do that, as the chairman has mentioned.
Mr. Chair, Delegate Pease, I think there's no question, in my view, under existing law, they have the authority. The question is, do they have the tools?
And whether it's a matter of priority, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely, yeah, I understand.
Other questions for the member? Okay, we operate by. Anyways, anybody here in favor of the bill want to speak? You're in favor of the bill, so you're going to come tell us why it's a good bill?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you. Victoria Cochran, Deputy Secretary for Public Safety and Homeland Security, on behalf of the administration. For all of the reasons that the Senator has mentioned, we think it is a very good bill. I think that the addition in the language alone of the expertise that would be brought to bear and the requirements of the bill that the governor seek out and put on the Board of Corrections, this kind of membership, will make a tremendous difference in the oversight of our jails, which the Board of Corrections currently has. I would also like to remind the committee that the Board of Corrections, not the Department of Corrections, is the entity that sets all of the standards and regulations around the operation of our local jails, and that this is a particularly significant aspect of the work that they do, and having this expertise, as it is laid out in this language, would make a tremendous difference. We certainly understand the concerns around the budget, but I have to agree with the Senator that if all we can do is accomplish the addition of that expertise to this board, we will be making a significant step.
Yes. Delegate Pease, did you have a question?
No, I think.
Okay, well, let me just ask, is there anybody opposed to the bill? Anybody opposed to the bill? All right, what's your motion? Delegate Poindexter has a question.
Right here, ma'am.
Yes, sir.
Just like that. Good. Based on your testimony here, I think you're saying that this board has the authority to direct the Department of Corrections to do an investigation.
Currently, the Department of Corrections provides the investigative arm for that board and supports them, although they are not in specific designated FTEs to do that. They have kind of worked that out.
Mr. Chairman, I have a motion.
Yes.
I would move to report. I think without there's no fiscal impact, but it would get more expertise on the board. Sometimes mistakes are made just without having the knowledge to properly investigate. With more expertise, we should hope to avoid mistakes that we've made in the past. I move to report.
there's duly seconded. Senator Dees, just so you know, we were less generous with our own member on this, and so we have some work to do there, so if you want to contribute in that work.
Mr. Chairman, if I might just get a discussion on the motion. We have, I know a number of us have spoken with Delegate Bell about this. This bill is different than the bill that we acted upon on the House side. I believe that he is supportive of what Senator Dees is trying to accomplish.
Okay, there's a motion to report duly seconded. All in favor of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
The bill reports. Thank you, Senator Dees. Now, let's see if the next one has the same good fortune, and that's 1442.
The other piece of it.
And it's identical to Senator Cosgrove. If y'all want to tag team that, that's just to save both of you time. That would be Senate Bill 940.
Sure. And Senator Cosgrove, I mean, has done an awful lot of work on this bill. I think if you want, would you like to?
Are they identical? Are these bills identical now?
Well, I'm not sure they're in identical form right now. That initially, the other side of the Jermichael Mitchell situation is to give people in jails a better handle on who they have in their jails. And so we're trying to come up with a recommendation of and this is another area where the commission's recommendations dovetail with the administration's. Try to come up with a tool, the Department of Behavioral Health come up with a tool to give jails to basically figure out, assess within 72 hours of admission to a jail, what sort of issues might exist with a person, whether there are mental health issues. This bill requires each local and regional jail to administer a mental health screening within 72 hours for a person admitted to jail. It had some fiscal impact. It had some budget. We can probably work on the language to.
I might take a little exception to some, but.
Well, it had some fiscal impact. There's no question. If you're going to do things, you're going to do them right, they're going to cost money. And this is an important issue.
We're looking at 4.2, which
Yes.
is probably, I mean, that's a local impact. That's not in the state budget. We don't have that in the budget. So this is a large mandate that we are passing on to the localities.
If I might, I think this is in the Senate.
It's Senator Cosgrove.
Thank you, sir. I believe this is in the governor's proposed budget.
I believe this was in the governor's proposed budget.
Yes, that was it. That was his suggestion.
Right. Yeah. And if I might, just very briefly, I'm going to let Senator Dees really run with this because he's the subject negotiation. This is something that's clearly needed in every single locality, whether it's Chesapeake or whether it's Southwest Virginia or Northern Virginia. Our jails are acting as a secondary mental institution, and we've got to have some type of screening to find out who needs what type of treatment and avoid another Jermichael incident. So that's what drives the bills, Mr.
Let me ask both of you a question. I mean, I think the underlying piece is I do think something needs to be done in this area, but in my discussion with some of the sheriffs, they're granted what you're doing here, but then there's the business of the Community Services Board. I mean, they have a lot of the money and a lot of the capability to get after some of this stuff, and the problem is, some of the sheriffs are saying they can't really make that connect.
I hear that everywhere, and the problem is, and through our action over the years, we've made the community service boards pay for service type organizations, and community service boards throughout, there are 40 community service boards, and if you've seen one community service board, you've seen one community service board. If you've seen one relationship between a CSB and a jail, you've seen one. They are as different as night from day.
Does this smell feel sense to you that we really need to take a clean sheet of paper to hold the community service boards?
You know, I promise you, that's on the agenda. That's something we're looking at.
Can we all plan that with you?
Yes, sir, absolutely, but this is something that has to, I've got some language that I think will take out the fiscal impacts But over the long haul, this assessment tool is something that we absolutely, as Senator Cosgrove so eloquently stated, we have to have a tool necessary. Jermichael Mitchell is one example, but there was a woman in Fairfax County who was basically tased to death a year and a half ago by jailers. There are people that, there was a woman in Chesterfield County a year and a half ago that died. And there's just no, it happens all the time, or it doesn't happen all the time, but it happens more than it should, more frequently than it should. We have to get a handle on it, and some sort of assessment tool is necessary. Now, I've got some amendments that I think will take this.
Well, let me ask this question. Let's get to that if we could. I mean, we have some time to do this, but we may not be able to do it in this body. We might have to do it somewhere else, but how are you going to take the fiscal impact off the requirement to do the assessment? Because that's the nexus. It's the assessment that's tied to the money, isn't
Well,
it?
the assessment's tied to the money, but we can take out the 72-hour limit. We can say as soon as reasonably can be done. We can say that we can take out the requirement that they have a person on staff that can do what we say. We can say if you've got somebody available to do it. I mean, we can massage this language and take a lot of the good stuff out of it in order to get something on the books and something started.
Well,
of course, I'm going to come back in another year.
Yeah, I'm sure. But what would that accomplish? I mean, honestly, if you did all of that and you got the bill, and you didn't have the assessment, what do you got?
We would get it started somewhere, because somewhere there would be some jail who would want to do the right thing and say this is what the right thing is.
I think we got it. Other people want to comment on these two good senators' bill? Yes.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Victoria Cochran, Deputy Secretary for Public Safety and Homeland Security. The Senator has hit the nail on the head, and I have sat in this body before and heard everyone opine that this is not a policy that is objected to, that the concern is the cost. And I would urge this committee to, as the Senator suggests, work maybe perhaps on the language to get it where you all are comfortable with it, but that taking a step in this direction is an absolute necessity for all of those individuals with mental illness who are incarcerated simply because of their mental illness, go into jails, are not properly identified because a correct screening tool is not used, and then...
I think we understand how the efficacy of this.
Yes, sir.
Our issue is money, and that is our focus right now. We understand the efficacy of the bill. I don't think we're in dispute over whether or not better screening is necessary. It's money, and in this case, $4.2 million. So I think we got that.
Yes, sir.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
The only thing I'd like to add on the screening, sir, is that I have worked very closely, and maybe the Department of Criminal Justice Services or the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services, both of whom are here, would care to speak to this issue. But I know those two agencies, Criminal Justice and Behavioral Health, work closely together and feel very strongly that this screening process in an efficacious 100% of the time, fidelity to an instrument that is a correct and well researched instrument could be used.
Are jails using instruments of this nature now?
They are, although not consistently across all of our 63 jails and not at 100% of all people who enter into the jails. And it is that really would make the difference. The other thing, sir, if I might, just that would...
Let me pick up on that.
Yes, sir.
Is there any way for us to see some of that data? I would like to know which jails are out of common sense compliance.
So, yes, sir, I think you could see that in the State Compensation Board's annual report on mental health in jails.
I'm going to have the council turn that up so we can at least be better, so we can better understand that.
The thing that you will not get out of that report, though, sir, is whether they are using that screening instrument, the particular screening instrument with fidelity, because they've been properly trained to use it, and on 100% of the people that are being booked into the jail. And those are the two nuggets that are important. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, any others in favor of the bill? Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Mike Edwards, on behalf of the Association of Regional Jails, as we discussed before, crossover, we remain supportive of the bill. We want to thank the patrons for bringing it forward. Mr. Chairman, you asked me before crossover if I will continue to work on this We will.
Dr. Rowe?
And Mike,
Yes, sir.
Are you gonna be supportive of the bill with no funding, meaning that the localities would then have to fund it?
Mr. Chairman, Delegate Rush, we recognize the hurdle of fiscal impact, but and the chairman asked me before crossover if we would stay at the table on this issue with you all and the Deeds Commission, and we will. We think it's important.
Okay. All right, let me hear, is anybody here opposed to the bill? I want to ask that question. Someone from VACO here?
Mr. Chairman, if I might, before that happens, I apologize for bringing two bills that are identical. And I don't know how that happened on our side. So if y'all can just roll 940 into Senator Deeds' bill.
All right,
Or
I'd
just-
accept that, I'd accept that motion if that's what you'd like to do. Is there a second? All in favor say aye. All right, we have one vehicle, thank
Senator
you.
Cosgrove, chief co-sponsor.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, yes, that's it.
Senator mentioned having some language that might make it easier for us to kind of, it's a smooth way moving forward.
I've got some suggestions out there.
Why don't you give those to us so we can have council look at it, and then we may not be able to do it now, but we will take a look at it and see what possibility. Baker, you okay with a $4.2 million hit if you don't do something about it?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. I'm Katie Boyle with VACO. We are supportive of the concept of this bill, absolutely. I think there's a lot of interest in standardizing the screening. We're happy to talk with the patron about some amendments. I think there are, a little bit of concern about the 72-hour window. I mean, my understanding is most jails are doing some kind of assessment, but not necessarily within that time frame. So, I think.
Do you have a feel for how many are what I would call in common sense compliant?
I'm just sort of pulling my information from the comp board's report. And I don't think that I've seen, which jails are doing which things. I've just seen percentages. I think, we felt more comfortable with this bill when there was money in the budget, and hopefully something can come out of conference that way, but we're happy to talk about ways to sort of mitigate some of the fiscal impacts. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I'll just confirm with the secretary, the assessment part of this bill, which was the expensive part, is gone. What remains is this screening, which is gonna require some training between, some combination basically between the Department of Criminal Justice Services and the Department of Behavioral Health, and I don't know that that's gonna be $4.2 million.
Now, the assessment is the real cost. I mean, that's what it comes down to.
And that's gone from the bill.
Yeah. Let me just. Yeah, how is it going? Because it is, hang on. It's still in, with that, if you did the amendment, okay. All right, let me just move this along. I don't think we're ready quite this second to fix your bill the way you want to do it. If we table the bill, we can bring it back off the table once we've had a chance to massage and figure this approach out. And Creed, just out of respect to you and John, if a bill doesn't come out, potentially we can look at the budget too. I mean, we can look at some language to at least get this thing moving in the right direction. Don't let me promise that to you right now. Let us go to work on what you suggested. And then what I would say is, David, when is the big committee gonna meet next, or? Friday. So we got a little time to take a look at this?
This language will take the cost out of the bill.
I mean,
Yes.
before we have the motion, I think it's important for our subcommittee to reiterate previously held positions, so the senator knows, may not have been privy, both senators who have not been privy to some of the things that we have been committed to moving down this road, including what was already in the budget regarding the college, regarding delegate heritage bill that deals with the CSBs and the MOUs that exist for pre-admission screenings. We also have language in the House budget. I would hope that both of y'all would help your Senate conferees also include in the final report, which would direct an update to training standards for law enforcement personnel that hasn't been done in 20 years, as well as the jail personnel, which hasn't been done in 10 years through DCJS. So I hope both of y'all would help us in that regard, because I don't believe it was in the Senate budget, but we do think that's important as part of this sort of comprehensive approach to address these problems and others, is they're not just de facto treatment centers for folks with mental health issues, they're also places where people with severe substance use disorders are going and drying out and dying. And so there's a combination of issues going on that, you know, we do care about and want to.
And one of them too, Bree, just so your commission is doing vital work for the Commonwealth, I mean, truth be known, and one of the things we wrestled with on our side before crossover was how do we sort of capture all these ideas about standards, because the standards are just out of date. They need to get fixed, and they need to get fixed soon. So we're trying to find a way to wrap that issue up, and you know, and we're trying to also address these other issues. I mean, truth of the matter is, you got people who are going into jails, who are on substance abuse. They stay there a couple of days, you put them back on the street, and back in the jail a week later. I mean, you just get this thing going, and nobody gets fixed.
Mr. Chair, I understand, I appreciate the committee's position. Yeah, I just know that this Jermichael Mitchell situation in particular got a huge amount of attention from the press and calls. It occupied a huge amount of time. Delegate Bell and Senator Cosgrove spent hours and hours and hours on it.
We're with you.
And the screening, if we strike the assessment, that's too bad, that's another day's work. But the screening, which will be all that remains in this bill, if those amendments, if you look at and they work, that's at least a step in the right direction.
Well, we will seriously do that, but right now we need to just move on with, all right, there's a motion to table, not debatable. All in favor, will say aye. Aye. All right, mindful that, we're gonna take what you've got here, we're gonna do some more work, and if we can get to a place where we think we can do something, then we'll look at possibly bringing a little resuscitation back. Otherwise, there's some other options that we will be looking at as well. Thank you very much for both of you. Okay, I'm sorry, yes, well, they were rolled together, so, yeah, they're together now. And Senator Deeds' bill is the bill that we're capturing here. Okay, Senator Lucas, you then have Senate Bill 1047.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Senate Bill 1047, if I might. This bill requires the Department of Criminal Justice Services to update the law enforcement training standards to include fair and impartial policing, implicit bias, and verbal de-escalation courses, which will be required in basic training for all law enforcement officers throughout Virginia. The bill also directs DCJS to provide technical assistance to law enforcement agencies in implementing modern community policing philosophies. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, just as a matter of background, the statutory language for community policing has not been updated since 2001. Recent events nationwide and in Virginia involving police shootings highlight the need for updated community policing training, standards, practices to be made available to law enforcement officers and agencies. This legislation would result in curricula and other learning resources that will be available to all 21,952 law enforcement officers in Virginia and that are employed by 327 agencies and extend to 38 criminal justice training academies. A budget amendment offered by Delegate Peace 395, yes, 1H, contains language supporting goals similar to this bill, Mr. Chairman. And here to further address the issue I have, yes. You want to come to the Fran, sorry.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Fran Ecker, Director of the Department of Criminal Justice Services. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you this morning. This bill is a priority of the department and of the administration. We spent some time over the summer. Secretary Moran held listening sessions on law enforcement, community relations. What we heard both from law enforcement agencies and from members of the public was a need to have the community engaged in policing and not just a recipient of policing. We established with resources that we would like to establish with resources that the governor put in his budget. $400,000 was put in for training that, as Senator Lucas said, would reach, through a training of trainers program, would reach all of our criminal justice academies and all of the law enforcement officers in Virginia over a period of time. I understand this is a tough budget year, but we believe that the language in the bill before you would modernize the intent of the Commonwealth around community policing. It would give direction to the department and to law enforcement, as well as reflect the values of community members. Thank you.
I want to go to Delegate Peace here in a minute. I think he's got some questions, but just, Senator, so you know, we had with Senator Herring, or with the Delegate Herring's bill on this side, we had a pretty robust discussion around this, and I think that as a subcommittee and a big committee as well, we are very much keenly focused on this notion of get some uniform standards, because as I mentioned in the previous bill, they're woefully out of date.
Sure.
They need to be brought into date, so congratulations for tackling the issue. We're not done with it. But one of the things that I observed a couple of weeks ago is I really think we do need an inventory of what best practices are going on out there in jails and in departments across the Commonwealth. And I'm not sure we have that yet. And I really hope that we'll get there, because here's what I found. Somebody out there is doing it right. And if we can find out who's doing it right, we can learn from it. And we can suggest that maybe everybody ought to do it. We do this in the Army all the time. There was some battery commander out there who was doing training better than everybody else. And the key was to make other people aware of what that guy was doing. And so one of the things that I would like to see, and hope that we can see, Delegate Peace, as we go forward with this thing, is really inventory the field. Get out there and find out what's going on out there, because somebody's doing it right. And whoever's doing it right, we ought to propagate it. And we ought to create a standard across the Commonwealth that gets there. Delegate Peace.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator and Director, for bringing this bill. I know that it's been referenced that we had a House bill that was not acted favorably on money in the House budget. We did have the House language that did make it into the budget that I referenced to the two prior colleagues. I have been bringing this issue up almost every subcommittee that we've met, and the very brief story and background is that having the privilege of serving as ex officio on the Criminal Justice Services Board, reached out to the director. I think it even was like the day before the Dallas shooting. It might have been the afternoon, actually. And we postponed our meeting because of that briefly, and then rejoined, and we had a very long session of going through the code, her board's composition. I had a bill that adds a new member to the board that represents the community interest, because I think it may be delicately said, it's certainly a very heavily weighted law enforcement board. Many of them who do a wonderful job, but I think we need to have the community's voice at the table as well as we look at the updating of the standards and community engagement or community policing models that exist. I'm very proud of this subcommittee for embracing the language I put forward. I'll be very frank, it's not something that you would necessarily expect us to do, and it had great success. We're going to need your help on the Senate side as well. When you read the language, it refers to the review that the chairman wants to conduct, but it also says that where appropriate, it should include consideration of, but not be limited to, the recommendations of the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing and the pillars that are contained in that report, which I believe that most, if not all, law enforcement personnel and departments embrace. And we live in a new day and age. I mean, we've probably not seen times like this in 50 years. And we want to make sure we're good stewards of the taxpayer, we're good stewards of the citizens' safety, and we're performing our tasks the way they're intended to, and upholding justice and the law. And so I'm very encouraged that we're embracing this concept and that we will have success in the Senate and House budget conference. I'm not privy to those conversations, but you know folks and your colleagues know folks. I hope we can have a final report that includes this directive. With that, because of our prior actions, we probably need to lay this bill on the table.
Mr. Chairman, might I ask a
but we'll
question?
Move forward with the common spirit that we have. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I noted in your comments that you indicated we need to do a survey of the training that's taking place. And I guess I'm just curious about who would do that survey? Would it be with the Director's Department? I mean, where exactly would we start to do that? Because we're talking about quite a spot of territory to cover, to come up with who and where that might be.
And I'll just refer to the language of our budget that says it will be a review of relevant stakeholders, all compulsory minimum training standards applicable to law enforcement officers, and with the update, the director shall ensure that those training standards appropriately educate law enforcement officers in the area of mental health, community policing, and serving individuals who are disabled, among others.
Mr. Chairman, one more question?
Yes, please.
But that's gonna require resources to do that, so I'm just wondering if the department would have the resources, I'm talking, not that they would not have the expertise, but would they have the actual personnel to make sure that that kind of survey gets done?
Fortunately, we've had pretty good experience with the department and the Secretary of Public Safety and other stakeholders to come together in a task force environment to work on other issues, and I think that might be appropriate in this case as well. So we've been able to do that. But the key is getting the stakeholders there and to really dig down and find out who's doing this right. I think the subtext, Senator Delegate Peace's comment is, please let's make sure this language that he's talking about is sustained on both sides of the budget so that we get it included. That's important.
Mr. Chairman, I don't want to take up a whole lot of your time, but I'd like to hear from the Secretary, to see if he might be able to give me some clue as to how this may take place, and I'm particularly concerned, because a lot of this stuff happens in my district. So, I mean.
And you should, I appreciate your leadership in this too, Senator. Mr. Secretary, anything you want to add to this idea that we're gonna create some language in the budget to move this thing forward?
Mr. Chairman, as you, Brian Rand, Secretary of Public Safety, as you well know, we spoke about this issue previous to crossover, and it was my opinion that we have sufficient evidence now of best practices throughout the country, in that we have that information now, and that's why we put forward this bill. We don't need to delay any further. We need this training today. So I would be of a different mindset than, I don't think this needs to be studied any longer.
I don't think it's so much study as in find out what we're doing, actually doing, and then see if we can't propagate it. Okay, we operate by motion. Is there any motion on this bill? Motion to table, duly seconded, not debatable. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, two noes. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If we're all here next year, I'll be back again.
I hope you will be. Good. All right. Having no other business before